Hi, I'm Lucy Larson, Manager of Museum Experience and Interpretation at the San Jose Museum of Art. SJMA is proud to present the series Artist of the Week, featuring artists from our permanent collection. The interviews you hear were conducted in January 2007. We hope you enjoy this series and subscribe to SJMA's podcast. For the Manuel Neri podcast, we interviewed Tracy Freedman, co-director of the Hackett-Freedman Gallery in San Francisco and Neri's representative for the past 7 years. Leading off the podcast, you'll hear the voice of Mark Van Proyen. Mark is a faculty member at the San Francisco Art Institute, a columnist for Art Week, and contributing editor for Art in America. Mark is currently writing the catalog essay for Manuel Neri's exhibition at the Hackett-Freedman Gallery, opening in March of 2007.
My name is Mark Van Proyen. I'm an art critic and artist, and I'm a professor at the San Francisco Art Institute. I've been aware of Manuel's work for ever since I was a student in the 70s. I've written kind of at length about an important exhibition that took place in 1967 in Berkeley titled Funk. And it occurred to me that Manuel really is kind of in some ways the wellspring for that movement. He was sharing a studio with his then wife, or soon-to-be wife, Joan Brown, and Joan was doing an experiment with a piece of dilapidated fur combined with a plaster sculpture, and the piece later became known as Fur Rat, which is now in the collection of the Berkeley Art Museum. But Manuel was kind of initially repulsed by the piece, and he said, wow, that's really funky. And this term caught on with a group of artists that they were associated with at the time, including Bruce Conner. And so by 5 years later, it became the basis for this very important and I think still influential art movement. The funny thing is, Manuel's work was never really all that funky. What I really appreciate about Manuel's work is how he gets to what I would call the spiritual core of classical aesthetics. He's taken several trips to Italy and Greece and is very familiar with the ancient tradition of sculpture, whereas a lot of artists kind of quote classical art in more or less an academic way. I think Manuel's work is unique in that he gets to what I would call the philosophical spirit of ancient sculpture. And he doesn't hit it at every single piece. Sometimes his pieces are just improvisations or studies, but a lot of time he does really create something that seems to exist not just for the nostalgia for classical sculpture, but actually within the belief system that classical sculpture sprang from.
My name is Tracy Freedman. I'm co-owner of Hackett-Freedman Gallery in San Francisco. We represent Manuel Neri and have shown his work for the past 7 years. What I like about Manuel Neri's work is the combination of classicism and expressionism expressed in the way he molds the figures and paints them. And it is a very interesting hybrid that is unique to Manuel Neri and makes his work highly recognizable, although from piece to piece there are many interesting variations. Today, Manuel Neri, I think, stands somewhat apart in that he has continued to be fascinated with the human figure and with the figure as a basis for applying paint in a quite abstract and gestural way for the last 40 years. So he is not part of any current new movement, but in fact did come out of the very rich period in the late 50s, early 60s in the Bay Area that is known as the Bay Area figurative movement. And the people who Neri studied with and painted with, who influenced some of his gestural approach to painting, would be David Park and Elmer Bischoff, who were considered two leaders of that movement.
Now, the piece that we have up right now is a kneeling figure done in 1991. I mean, it does look very athletic. You can't tell if the woman is perhaps a swimmer. I'm wondering if you think this is a sculpture of Joan Brown.
The model for that, if it was done in 1991, it's almost certain that it was Maria Julia Klemenko, who is Manuel's regular model, has been for a long, long time. Mary Julia is also a poet and actually a psychotherapist who has a Jungian orientation, and she's very, very much. I wrote an article once that characterized her as Manuel Neri's muse. She has a kind of unique body type that I think most women would envy. She's very lithe and slender. This is something that Manuel is able to project multiple things on. In the work that Manuel has done with Mary Julia, and most of the work for the 90s, you don't see the face spelled out. You have to kind of infer who this person is from body language, body attitude. It's a mystifying experience because it's hard to kind of get a handle on just who this woman is presenting herself as to the viewer. She seems to be certainly not aware that the viewer is observing her, but her gestures seem very natural and everyday, but at the same time there's a moment of idealization that's also captured in the way that Manuel treats the figure.
You could argue that some of the color Neri uses is influenced by the light and atmosphere of Northern California. I think his sensibility is more to the point about California, which is to say there's a lot of trust in intuition that he puts in both how he marks the figure, where he gouges and scratches at the surface and puts textures on and molds it and leaves it looking natural, and then how he applies the paint. I think the quality of intimacy and expression and spontaneity come from a Bay Area grounding and are values that Neri has very much incorporated into his timeless figures.